I mean, I don't even like to call it experimental. Let's say this should be the way how we create, formulate, share knowledge collectively. I do want to remind ourselves again to be respectful of each other's feelings, opinions, and learning, and most importantly, unlearning. Miscommunications, misunderstandings, and misinterpretations may happen. So let's be compassionate, empathetic, and considerate of each other's journeys. We're all experts on our own decolonial doing and thinking. We're going to have the same format today. So even though we have 3 speakers or guests that, you know, we could listen to for hours, unfortunately, will we only be able to give them, you know, first 30 minutes so we can go meet each other again in the breakout rooms, which is also, I think, an amazing experience. And then we'll come back together for the last 30 minutes to reflect on what was said in the breakout rooms. So as you know, we've mentioned a couple of times, we have the great pleasure to have Rolando Vazquez with us, who is an assistant professor of sociology at the University in Utrecht. And together with Walter Mignolo, who we already welcomed once before, they are, at least for me, incredibly inspirational thinkers on decoloniality, decolonial thinking and doing. And together they also co-organize the Middelburg Decolonial Summer School. And we also have the incredible pleasure this evening or this morning, depending on where you are, to welcome Lesiba, Mabitsela, who is a fashion creative based in South Africa. And we just thought it would be an amazing dynamic to have 2 amazing thinkers and 1 amazing practitioner having a conversation together. So yes, I would like to give the floor to Lesiba, who's gonna kick off, I think, with a question for Walter and Rolando, and we'll take it from there. So thank you. Enjoy, everyone.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. Hello to everybody else as well. I hope that everybody is fine wherever in the world you are. Walter, so I think my question was sent to you about a while back, but I'm certainly very interested in decolonial aesthesis. As a designer, obviously I've come from my years becoming a fashion designer, and I think pretty early on I was very interested in how designers, how they got there, how they became, you know, inducted in the Chambre Syndicale de la Haute Couture in Paris. And so a designer like Adeline Twiga or Adeline Andrea kind of got to me because I understood that she patented a way of a sleeve being able to wrap around the body. So it was called a 3-hole sleeve. And that kind of got me thinking around how what the contribution to world fashion is from an African perspective, based on the construction of clothing, what patents do we hold, etc., etc. That was many years ago, and I have kind of come up with my knowledge now, having done my thesis in theater and performance. But during that time, it got me to understand this idea, a Japanese concept called ma, which is a study of negative space. And it is a study which was taken a little bit further within the idea or relationship between the body and cloth. Obviously, our bodies have a history, and the cloths that we wear also have a history. And so I was really interested in how those dynamics, particularly when you think about Western clothing, which are kind of very much a tight-fitted, constructed look, and societies outside of the Western sort of canon tending to wear things that are a little bit more non-fitted or flowing. But yeah, they vary from society to society. And so my ultimate sort of goal as a young designer was, how do you create, or what is an authentic African aesthetic, or fashion aesthetic, or clothing aesthetic, or what is a contribution onto the fashion landscape that we can bring in? But it also kind of led me to think around spirituality as a connective tissue between African forms of representation or clothing and its diaspora. So individuals who went over to other societies, obviously due to the advent of colonialism, but in many ways have learned or have made their type or their style of clothing pretty unique due to some sort of connected spiritual sort of energy. And I think about music in the same sort of tone, in that, you know, music can be produced here in South Africa, but hit the soul of someone in diaspora. So I'm very interested in whether fashion has that same sort of energy. And that's my one question. The second question is how, you know, the idea of decoloniality is not necessarily anti-capitalism, but we understand that capitalism is at the core of many of the ills of the world today, particularly colonialism. But how do we engage with today's society in that regard? How do we, is there a way for decoloniality or decolonial thinking to exist within the spaces of capitalism? Particularly as a fashion designer, looking to develop my practice and to communicate with the younger designers to kind of see a different sort of outcome or a different sort of design philosophy as well.
Walter or Rolando, would you like to respond to Lesiba? You will have to unmute.
Being polite and muting myself, but I think Rolando should go first because I already got a shot a month before. Unless Rolando want me to go. I mean, I don't want to force him.
Well, of course, you are the elder of the school, so I think you should go first. It's part of our spirituality, right? That the elders go first, so please, Walter. Then I pick it up from you.
What? Mabitsela went home. So we don't need to go?
His camera, his video may be turned off, but he's still.
No, but Rolando, you want me to go or you?
Yes.
Yes,
Well,
I was saying that as you are the elder of decoloniality.
Oh, okay. No, I mean,
I
okay.
just follow.
Okay, I go.
I mean, I have things to say, but of course, I prefer
No,
to listen to you.
I go for short time, 5 or 6 minutes, and then so you have more time. So I don't know from where to start. I mean, but I will start from, because that Rolando will have also a lot to say. Why aesthesis? Why we start talking about aesthesis and not aesthetics? Because we don't want to talk about aesthetics. That is why. So, because aesthetics, 18th century European concept, is controlled by philosophy, controlled by knowledge, but also controlled subjectivity, controlled taste, and judge who is valuable and who is not valuable. Aesthesis is sensing, the sense of perception, said Aristotle. I mean, it doesn't matter that Aristotle said, but every human being has a sense of perception and have a taste. And there is no human being who has the right to say this is the rule of the taste. So that is why we kind of run away from aesthetics and began to talk about aesthetics. Aesthetics is not art, it's philosophy. It's a philosophical conception that Kant and then Hegel reduced it to fine art. So from Hegel to Rancière is the same story. So we don't want to be in that club. So the question, we began to elaborate the relationship between decoloniality and aesthesis. Kind of began to think about ourselves, our sensing, how we relate to the world, how our sensing, emotion guides our thinking. And yeah, there are artists too, but there are artists who have the problem, also the same problem, said, well, what I do is not art, as those people say. A friend of ours, a Maya Quiche person, he said that he's an artisto, to kind of say it because Maya difficulty is pronouncing the A in Spanish, and they say O. So he's an artisto. And he said, I don't do art, I do chunches. And chunches is a Maya Quiche concept, word, cosas. So he makes things. So that is the question of poiesis, is a question of word making, making things and thinking about and feeling, sensing what you do. So that's what we start there is much more to say, and we send an article. But when I think about fashion, and then that's why I started the story, but I won't go long on that, about let's say the Homo sapiens. So the Homo sapiens needed first to protect themselves because they were not like the lion who have a kind of furry skin. But as the group, the community grow, people began to care for appearance. And I think that is a question. So the appearance in the sense of how would you like to be seen within what you can manage to be seen, because there are things that you cannot control. People will see you, doesn't matter what kind of appearance. So I see what is today called fashion is a kind of is that kind of appearance. Look at the kings and the queens in the 16th, 17th century, etc., etc., etc. So there is an appearance, and also that goes in relation with roles. If you are a king or a queen, you don't want to look like a carpenter, right, who makes the table for your castle. So appearance is related to social role and is related to money, but not to capitalism yet. I think for me, fashion, as we understand it today, is related to the capitalist in relation, because before the king and queen were kind of mercantile capitalism, but not kind of the capitalism of the 18th century that brought a new ethno-class we call the bourgeoisie. And I think with the Industrial Revolution, consumption exploded, and also the printing press, so you can print photos of appearances, and so fashion became related to commodities, how to sell things. So in that sense, my question to Mabitsela will be, can capitalism and decoloniality coexist? No. Absolutely no. Because capitalism is a part of the colonial measure of power. We don't talk about capitalism. Liberal and Marxists talk about capitalism. Liberal like it, Marxists don't, but they agree that it's something where capitalism. But we talk about the economic coloniality because we don't see capitalism as a kind of isolated thing from governance, from knowledge, from racism, from sexism, all the kind of the configuration of the colonial measure of power. But what can coexist, and it is coexisted, is capitalism with de-Westernization. De-Westernization and capitalists work together, but in a kind of conflictive way, because China appropriated capitalism, but not liberalism. Now, the people who were a few years ago were talking about reorienting fashion, they were not decolonial, they were de-Western. Now we have money in Indonesia or in Taiwan, and we decide what kind of appearance we would like to sell to the market. Not Ralph Lauren and all these kind of guys from Paris or Italy. We have a different kind of memories and way of appearing. So de-Westernizing is a very interesting concept. It's related to capitalism, and only you can de-Westernize if you appropriate capitalism. Not if you surrender and are a slave of Western capitalism. And that is happening in economy and politics with China, Russia, etc. But it's also happening in culture. Economy and politics are culture too, but we divide that. I don't have time to elaborate that. So you see the kind of the Sharjah Biennale. There are many biennales, not many, but 3 or 4 biennales that are clearly de-Westernizing, even mentioned like that. The museum of Doha and the Museum of Singapore are clearly, and they are made with money. So now that I mentioned the museum, I mentioned one more thing. I stop, and I think that in the museum, for example, to kind of, so you can figure out what may be kind of parallel to fashion. In the museum today, there are 2 kind of conversations. One is de-Western, as I just mentioned, and the other is decolonial. So what they are talking about is how to strip, it's interesting, the metaphor, how to strip the museum of their coloniality. Because the museum is a colonial institution. And fashion, as we know it today, is a imperial colonial institution. Yeah? It's related to power, etc. So the question, my point here is, the people who are de-Westernizing the museum, they don't question the museum. They appropriate the museum to reconstitute an identity that Western capitalists and museum institutions told them they have to despise. That is, and it's important. I'm not saying that it's not important. I'm saying we have to make distinction. While decolonizing the museum, what they are questioning is the institution itself. So in the case of fashion, to kind of conclude, you either use fashion, kind of bring it a different kind of appearance, African or Muslim or indigenous or whatever, within capitalism, or you question fashion itself. And this is the decolonial task. We start from there. We don't take anything for granted. So if you incorporate decoloniality into the current vocabulary and I want to say spirit because there's another question, into the sphere and the fashion and the image of fashion today, what you are doing, in our view, is de-Westernizing. And that is very important, because de-Westernizing is questioning the hegemony of Western fashion, controlled mainly by Italy and France, but also the German, they have not much taste for, sorry, for fashion, but the Italian and French do. And if you want to do a decolonial work, you have to start from the scratch. When this concept of fashion was created, who did it, why, in which way, and then we go on. And that is how we started with the aesthetic. We just said, well, we don't want to have anything to do with aesthetic, but the aesthetic is with us. So we have to link and find the way out. The way out depends on who you are, where you are, what is your personal, professional stories, and you have to find the way, if that is the way you want to find. Because if you don't want to find that way, you don't have to. There is no obligation to be decolonial, right? Well, 8 minutes I talk, so Rolando.
Okay, thank you, Walter. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Lesiba. Well, we have 5 minutes. Let
No, you have
I
8.
okay. I think Lesiba, the work you shared about the suit and its history, I think I will just comment on that because it is, I think, a very important element to connect to your two questions that are very big questions. And is understanding the suit as as a very important moment or uh, history of fashion in which the body is turned into a space of representation. So when we study aesthetics in the decolonial, it's not just also the arts, but it is also who controls the representation of the world, who has the power over the visible, over the representation of the world. So this suit that is, as you very well say, the embodiment of masculinity and the corporation is performing this representation of a body that is complicit with the erasure of other bodies. Right? So there you have modernity, coloniality. There is no modernity without coloniality. There is no this representation of the suited body, the masculine body, the corporate body, the body of the statesman, without the coloniality, without the denigration of other bodies that are not suited or that are unsuited for this modern colonial system, right? And here you have that it is a representation that is directly connected to consumption and to forgetting. This orientation of aesthetics as consumption, as the pursuit of novelty, passion of contemporaneity, and the forgetting of its relations to others and to earth, right? So it doesn't matter if it cuts all the material, and so it doesn't matter the history behind it, its relational history. So in a sense, it has no spirituality. Right? So when you say in your question, I understand spirituality as a relation, I think that's very important for us because that is precisely what is cut in the tailoring, in the cutting of the work of others, where it just becomes the authorship of the fashion designer, for example, right? Whereas in all forms of dress that I know of, at least of non-modern or other forms that are not in this logic of incorporating the body into the representation. So you see the logic of incorporation, bringing the body into the logic of capital, right? And the logic of power. Then it is, so it is implicated in two things that we have discussed in many places, but I will just mention them quickly, which is the consumption of the life of others through coloniality. And because there is no suit without that, right? And without the people in the fields and the people in the fabrics of fabric, right? Even the word fabric has this history of textiles. And then, and the consumption of earth, right? So the plantation. So for example, for me, the plantation is a founding moment of modern coloniality and global capital because it organizes the consumption of the life of earth and the mass consumption of the life of others for the production of the commodity. So in a way, the suit is that manifestation, in a masculine power, that is the state and the corporation. So the question here, moving towards aesthesis, is or the question of spirituality, what you see in the suit is the loss of these relations. And if we were to decolonize fashion, or like how Sandra Nielsen speaks about redressing, is I think we need to move from the logic of representation to the logic of reception, from the logic of owning to owing. So some things that I've written in some places. And here, the reception would mean, like you already signal it in your work, but it's also, for example, very present in Mesoamerica, in the way dress is made in Mesoamerica, that it respects the work of the other that produced the fabric in the loom, etc. Right? So it's not about cutting, it's about folding. It's about respecting the ancestrality. It's about entering in relation with the others and the earth that are behind, how we can dress. So then dress is not a design of futurity, but it's a relation of reception, and that embodies a completely different temporality. So here I will contrast, and I will finish with this, incorporation in the logic of capital, of this masculine body, for example, with enfleshment or embodiment that implies memory, that implies relations, and that doesn't think in terms of individuality, but thinks in terms of the commune. And that would be the decolonial understanding in the way I would see it. Now my time is over, so I finished. Thank you very much for these questions and this space.
Well, thank you. Thank you so very much, Walter and Rolando. It feels like we've really incredibly conditioned you to stick to your time. And I'm sorry if that caused, any trauma, because I mean, it's so incredibly enriching to listen to the two of you. So, but thank you for being so incredibly disciplined with the time. So what we're going to do now then is going to the breakout rooms where we can discuss in smaller groups, and especially I think it's very inspiring to talk about this idea of aesthetics and AestheSis. But I think, and Erica, I'm looking at you, even though you can't see, I'm actually looking at you. I think you also wanted to talk about the decolonial method. Is that correct?
Hello, everybody. I just thought part of the reading that Decolonial AestheSis kind of brings up is and you raised it in the paper, is the decolonial method, and to start to maybe think about that decolonial method in our breakout rooms. I know, Angela, in your Fashion Theory Journal article, you also referred to this method as an incredibly powerful way to start to think. And I just thought we've got such a rich conversation going here, but just to summarize very quickly, because it's such dense and rich work, I just thought I'd just take from your journal article that together Walter and Rolando formulated the decolonial method to decolonize modern concepts, and consisting of 3 steps. So to show the genealogy in Western modernity that allows us to transform the universal validity claims of Western concepts and to turn them into concepts historically situated. So I think that's what you sort of mentioned already, Walter. The second step is to show their coloniality, that is how they function to erase or silence or denigrate other ways of understanding and relating to the world. And the third is to build on these grounds the decolonial option as a non-normative space, as a space open to the plurality of alternatives. So I would almost say that I think this is such a rich conversation that we've started between the 3 of you, Lesiba, Rolando, and Walter, to kind of explore what are those plurality of alternatives. Where are we looking for in those spaces? So I think, yeah, I look forward to the breakout rooms, and we'll see you when we come back.
Thank you, Erica. So I think we're going to be sent